Welcome to The Outlet, an NBA podcast hosted by Nick Fay and Kory Waldron.
On this episode of The Outlet, Kory and I discuss the latest NBA trade news, Chris Paul to the Suns, Denis Schroeder to the Lakers, and more. As always, you can catch The Outlet on all streaming platforms. Enjoy the show. All right, Kory, we had our first big trade of the offseason. Musa for Bruce Brown. Just kidding. We were talking Chris Paul to the Phoenix Suns. Obviously, we mentioned this last week on a couple episodes, had a couple proposals, actually pretty similar to what we had. And the finalized deal is Chris Paul, Abdul Nader going to the Suns for Kelly Oubre Jr., Ricky Rubio, Ty Jerome, and Jake Leak, and a 2022 first-round pick with protections, which you can find on Sham's Twitter account. But, Kory, initial reaction to this trade and what it means for both sides.
The initial reaction has to be from the Phoenix Suns' point of view. Of course, a team that went 8-0 in the bubble. Devin Booker had a big-time game-winning shot. The team looked to be, rolling on all cylinders. Unfortunately, weren't able to make the playoffs. And they carry that momentum into making this Chris Paul trade and into forming a sort of type of big three. Now, it's not like an elite big three by any means, but Chris Paul, the point guard, Devin Booker, a young up-and-coming scorer. And then you have DeAndre Ayton, who last year, after missing 25 games because of the suspension because of PEDs, really is a double-double machine, has added some better rim protection. Still needs to get better, I think, defensively around the perimeter and outside the paint. But it's good building blocks if you're the Suns. And clearly, James Jones and company, they want this team to make the playoffs, and they are in the driver's seat to do so. So I love this move from the Suns aspect. Chris Paul doesn't even need to be as good of a scorer as he was his past year with OKC because he's got a clear-cut number one option in Devin Booker. It's really just him running the offense, and he's an upgrade over, of course, a guy like Ricky Rubio, whose shooting is very inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, it's big for the Suns. And like you said, they're trying to build off that momentum from the bubble, 8-0, and just a lot of positivity with Monty Williams. And we've talked about this. The Suns have been looking to get a star. They've been looking to establish that culture, get back into the playoffs. And this move puts them in position to do that. I don't think it necessarily locks them in, just given how tough the West is, injury history of Chris Paul and other players on that team. There is still some concern, but you like to see them make these moves. And to be honest, they didn't really give up much. Kelly Oubre was a guy they were looking to trade anyways. He's on an expiring contract. Ricky Rubio, like you said, Chris Paul's an upgrade. Ty Jerome, Jalen, not necessarily big name prospects. The 2022 first round pick, it is protected. So it's not like you're super worried about that turning into like some type of superstar player. So honestly, for the Suns, it's kind of like a no-brainer to an extent if you didn't think you were going to spend that cap space, and now you're in a somewhat, playoff contending position. You still have cap space to send this summer to maybe add a guy like a Jeremy Grant or some other wing on that team. Things are looking really good. And like we talked about in a previous episode, they're not going to be contending, but Chris Paul is kind of a bridge to that next chapter for them, because hopefully by the end of this Chris Paul contract, we're talking about Devin Booker being a top 10, top 15 player, DeAndre Ayton being a top 10, maybe top 5-ish center. That's what you're hoping to see. And if anybody's kind of get the best out of a big man, it's probably Chris Paul. Like DeAndre Ayton is probably going to have an even better season. Obviously, he's so young, you already expect an improvement, but having a guy like Chris Paul to throw oops to you and just set the offense up, and even what he can teach Devin Booker. We've seen Devin Booker really evolve as a playmaker. Now having, being able to pick the brain of a Chris Paul, it's only going to make guys better. And even like you look at some of the other young pieces, Mikal Bridges, drastic improvement last year, especially as an offensive player. Cam Johnson really showed up as a rookie too. So like you have to be happy if you're Phoenix. What do you think from the OKC side?
I just want to say one more point on the Suns point. Underlying also, the concerns about will Devin Booker be unhappy and force a trade out of Phoenix. Those fears are very low, if not, even relevant at this point in time, because adding a superstar like Chris Paul, not only are you bringing in a top flight player, but you're showing Devin Booker we are willing to make this team better in pursuit of making the playoffs and hopefully, at some point contending for a title. So it's all good from that standpoint, as well as keeping Devin Booker happy, because again, Ryan Russillo, we mentioned I think on the last part of the pod before, he had said the worst kept secret is Devin Booker wants out. Well, I don't think there's any secret that Devin Booker's probably pretty happy right now in Phoenix.
Yeah, reports were that he wanted this trade, and anything, it buys you a 2-year window. While Chris
Right.
Paul's on that team, they're going to be competitive. There's not a guarantee for the playoffs, but he just took an OKC team that we all thought was in a rebuild and that didn't really have a chance to playoffs. If anything, maybe could squeeze in. They looked really good all year long, and he helped the young players improve. And I think like you can't say enough about the culture that's going to change in Phoenix. We saw some improvements last year with Monty Williams and Ricky Rubio helping with that, but having a guy like Chris Paul, who's one of the best point guards of this generation, if not the best point guard, probably all time, top 5 guy, like he can really do some big things for this Phoenix Suns franchise. But flipping to OKC, what are we liking from that side?
I mean, OKC is not hiding what their objective is for this offseason, and that's to get rid of their veterans and acquire assets. We saw Denis Schroeder moved for Danny Green in the pick, and we're now seeing Chris Paul moved for, a good veteran, Ricky Rubio, who I could see possibly flip to the deadline. Kelly Oubre Jr., another guy I could see possibly flipped later on this season. An expiring deal. Maybe some team likes Kelly Oubre as a wing for the future because, again, not a guy who's terribly old. And then you still got, Ty Jerome. Maybe he developed into a rotational player for OKC. And again, they added another asset. So for me, that's the highlight of this deal for the Thunder. Bringing in more flippable assets and then getting another draft pick and a young player. Like, this is perfect if you're OKC. They're moving into a window where they're going to have all of these assets and only 1 or 2 young players possibly on the roster who you want to keep, and that's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Lou Dort, right? Those are probably the 2 guys you want to keep at this point, and then all these assets. So OKC is really sitting pretty. Shout out to Sam Presti. He's been a wizard the last 2 off seasons.
I mean, you really can't make any complaints about this because you're getting the first round. You got this contract. First off, you got picks attached to Chris Paul on the contract he's on by trading Russell Westbrook. And now, like you said, Kory, you're getting Kelly Oubre, who you could possibly keep, but most likely you're going to trade him at the deadline, pick up an extra pick of some sorts. And then also, you have Rubio. I'm not sure how much you can move him because I think he has another year on his deal at $17 million. I'm not sure anyone's super excited to take on that deal. But it gives you still the cap relief of the difference between $44 million for Chris Paul to Ricky Rubio only making 17. And yes, OKC is not going to sign a free agent over this period or a big name free agent, most likely, but they can take on another one of these salary dumps and pick up even more draft picks. I'm going to pull up their draft picks for the upcoming year because it's something ridiculous. But any other thoughts on OKC before we move on?
I mean, from also just staying a competitive standpoint, I also just don't see OKC simply rolling over and being a bad team yet. I mean, now, right, Steven Adams could be traded, right? I think that's now a growing possibility or, an even farther possibility. Danilo Gallinari definitely not coming back. But, Ricky Rubio is still a very good playmaking point guard that can at least keep the offense running relatively smoothly, even though like Chris Paul, you still have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who now you're expecting to have a bigger role. Maybe he pops off and has an even better year. So I don't think OKC is obviously going to be a playoff team this year, but I could see them still being a team that's hovering, right around 500 possibly for majority of the season and then dipping later depending on what kind of moves they make because there's still decent talent on this team. But again, they're looking for the future. Now, what are the draft picks looking like?
So we got 2020 Nuggets first round pick, Lakers first round pick. 20 own first round pick, they have the Heat's first round pick, and they have a pick swap with Houston. 2022, they have their own first round pick, the Clippers first round pick, and the Suns first round pick that's protected. 2023, they have their own first round pick, a pick swap with the Clippers and the Heat's first round pick. 2024, they have their own first round pick, the Clippers first round pick, and the Rockets first round pick, which could also be super valuable given what's going to happen with James Harden and Russell Westbrook. And then we got 2026, they have their own first round pick, the Clippers first round pick, and the Houston first round pick. So, I mean, they're not necessarily at this time crazy good picks, but things could easily go sour in Houston and Los Angeles being the Clippers. And those picks could be great. They could be lottery picks. I know there's probably some protections on them. They're not all listed here, but you're talking about, a ton of extra picks for we're not talking 10 years. We're talking a 6-year window. It's going to be interesting to see what OKC can do with all these picks because you're never drafting this many players because if we talked about drafting this many players, you'd have enough for essentially a second team. So it's how can they turn these picks into either going up in the draft or turning them into a big player down the line? So OKC is going to be a team to really consider for almost any trade over the next 6 years.
It's incredible. Them owning their 2021 pick actually makes me think more likely of them flipping as many assets, like flipping Ricky Rubio again, flipping Kelly Oubre, because you're probably going to want to be as bad as possible this year because
And a
we
stacked
do know,
draft.
right, the 2021 draft class is expected to be a stack one where a lot of people want to either get into the draft or keep their draft pick. So now I'm expecting OKC to go full on tank and to get rid of these guys, Rubio, Oubre Jr., Steven Adams, as quickly as possible to get worse. But again, like you said, all these draft picks, you're not going to probably draft all these guys, but you can package them with other deals. Maybe it makes it easier to trade a Steven Adams if you trade one of those future Rockets or Clippers picks. I don't know. But you have a lot of options and a lot of variety to choose from in all these assets.
Well, I guess while we're here, let's talk about the other trade that happened yesterday. We have Danny Green going to OKC with the Lakers' first-round pick in exchange for Dennis Schroeder. And obviously, we just talked about OKC grabbing an asset. They're probably going to be able to flip Danny Green for a first-round pick. If maybe it doesn't happen before the season, which they're hoping it does, at the very least, it's happening at the deadline. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. They still got the first-round pick for Dennis Schroeder, who's expiring, had a career, got the value. Not really a ton to talk about from the OKC side on there, but tell me a little bit about the Lakers side.
Yeah, I mean, the Lakers got a six-man of the year candidate in Dennis Schroeder. Now, Schroeder can be the starter for them, which I'm expecting. I don't think he's going to be the six-man for that Lakers team. But the Lakers didn't think they were going to be able to bring back Rondo, or at least they didn't want to bring back Rondo for his expected price tag at the very least. And Quinn Cook isn't going to be that guy. Avery Bradley's, up in the air. So Dennis Schroeder gives you a decent playmaker and an offensive guard who, if he keeps up his production last year, very good, right? 18 points per game, shot over 40% from the field, 38% from three. So you like or maybe it was 36% from three. I got to double check that. But again, this is a guy
38% from three.
It was 38%.
Career year, though. So take it with a grain of salt. Not necessarily career 33% shooter from three, but last year on 5 attempts, shot 38% from the field. The year before, shot 34% on 4.6. But in 17-18, shot 29% on 3.9. So
yeah, that's
I think
good.
The three-point shooting is kind of still up in the air, but signs would make you think that, hey, he's trending upward in that department, which kind of every NBA player should be.
Right. And I mean, I would think at least playing with two superstars, he's never played with as talented players of Anthony Davis and LeBron James caliber. So maybe that makes his life a little bit easier. Maybe he gets some better looks. But he's going to be a crucial element for this Lakers team trying to repeat. So I love the move from the Lakers. Like you said, Danny Green, I expect him to be flipped. Maybe it's this offseason we're in currently, or maybe it's at the deadline. But I could see a contender wanting to take, roll the dice. Because, again, Danny Green's now a three-time NBA champion, 3 different teams. And even though his shooting has become far more inconsistent as it was in his early days, this is still a solid 3-and-D wing or 3-and-D guard that you should bring on your team if you're looking to add some depth.
Yeah, like his on-ball defense has slipped a little bit too, but his off-ball defense and basketball IQ, you can't really replicate in terms of just like your regular wings. Like he's a guy that's going to help your team defense because he's that smart, where just a lot of younger players don't have that ability yet in their career. And like you said, inconsistent three-point shooting, but still a guy that would provide value on a contender. And just talking Dennis Schroeder a little bit, you look at Dennis Schroeder and what he's good at. He's extremely quick. He's good at getting to the rim, creating space for himself, and having the bigs that LA has in terms of setting screens and opening up space. Like he should be able to get in the lane and really penetrate things and be able to be a playmaker and really alleviate some of the pressure that was on LeBron James. As good as Rondo was last year, they still needed another playmaker, somebody who could really create offense. I don't want to say like instantly, because I'm not sure Dennis Schroeder is that level of player. He did probably play at that level last year, but it's big for them. Like they knew they had a weakness going into the season, and it was offense and playmaking, especially in the half court. And Dennis Schroeder, like you said, a guy that averaged 18 points per game, shot over 46% from the field, 38% from three. That's an offensive plus. The question more so is on his defense. Obviously undersized. He is quick though, and he does occasionally like show a lot of effort defensively. So getting him to buy in that system is going to be big, but also Lakers already have a great team defense, and having some of the best rim protectors in the league, if they're able to, keep them all together, hiding Dennis Schroeder will not be hard on the defensive end. So Lakers get a major plus here because they didn't really trade a ton. We're talking about the 28th pick in the draft, 30th pick in the draft, something along those lines.
It's like 28th or 27th. But yeah, it just shows too that the value of certain assets are a lot lower than maybe we anticipated. Like if that's what Denis Schroeder is getting, it makes me wonder from a Pacers perspective, like what are the deals circling for Victor Oladipo if that's all it took to get Denis Schroeder, who had a really good year, career year, and was a Sixth Man of the Year candidate. So it just shows that teams, the value of assets are probably a little bit lower this offseason for certain players.
Especially expiring deals and going to 2021, like the guys know that there's cap space out there and there's no guarantee you're going to be able to retain him. I know the Lakers, there were some reports mentioning that the Lakers are already talking an extension with Schroeder, which is a possibility, but I wouldn't say it's a guarantee. It's going to be really interesting. You mentioned Oladipo. I thought about a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie, who's probably even closer in stature in terms of being, a six-man type player. I would say Dinwiddie's probably a better all-around player too. But still, like if you're getting a late first for Schroeder, and the only way I guess I would look at it a little differently, I guess like instead of just thinking about the pick, Danny Green is still somewhat valuable. So maybe that means like you're getting essentially 2 late first round picks because you're going to be able to flip him possibly for something else. So,
I can see that. That does make more sense.
You know what I mean? Because he is a good player regardless. Like even if let's just in a vacuum, like Denis Schroeder is better than Danny Green, but it's not to the point where you're like, wow, he's so much better than Danny Green. You know what I mean?
Right. Again, they bring different things to the table. I think that's the biggest thing. Doesn't mean Danny Green's value is nothing, but it's just significantly different.
Yeah. And I think there's also the Lakers had a little confidence. I heard this on a podcast. I think it was The Athletic saying how there's just a ton of free agent wings. And we've already had the reports that they have interest in Wes Matthews. Wes Matthews declined his option. Seems like there's probably some tampering, and we're going to see that announced at, 6:01 on Saturday or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I could definitely see that. One thing I want to bring up, and this is going back to the Chris Paul trade. Chris Paul has played under Monty Williams as well.
Yeah.
Under the New Orleans Hornets back in the day. They were 46-36. So I just wanted to grab that tidbit. It's also a little bit of a reunion for Chris Paul and Monty Williams, who have some history.
I recall hearing something about it. I can't recall if it was something positive or negative. There was definitely like something correlated, and I wasn't sure exactly what it was. But yeah, there is a connection.
His last year in New Orleans is when Monty Williams was the head coach. I'm pretty sure. So it was a 1 year and done thing. But again, because I think that's the 2010-2011 season was their last year, and that was definitely the year he was traded to the Clippers when it was first, the Lakers.
Yeah. I would assume Chris Paul was a little sassy that year, obviously being upset with that whole situation in New Orleans. But I've never heard of anyone not liking Monty Williams. He seems to be like one of the most liked people in the NBA. But Kory, anything else you want to touch on the OKC, Lakers, or even the Suns stuff?
No, I think we covered it to as best detail as we can at this point.
I guess just quickly, I know this isn't a big-time trade, but we could talk about Brown and Musa and obviously the second-round pick going to Detroit. Any thoughts on that? Obviously, Musa, a player for the Nets that hasn't really done much, was a first-round pick. Brown, on the other hand, was a second-round pick, showed a lot of improvement. Thoughts on this deal and what it means for either team?
Yeah, I mean, Musa, I mean, you're no better than me on the Musa front. I saw a highlight reel that was created on Twitter. It's got some really good music to it, but it's Musa being absolute dog shit. Now, this was a guy who shot like 36% from the field, 24% from three. There's a lot of to be desired with Musa, but Pistons are in rebuild mode. They take a chance. It really was them doing the Nets a favor. The Nets also got $400,000 salary in this deal. They free up the number 13. Wink, wink. And they're adding depth to the point guard position because Brown is a very good defender and did show flashes last year with the Pistons. I know Pistons fans, from everything I saw reaction-wise, they were a fan of Brown. They were sad to see him go. So definitely a good move for the Nets winning this trade. Now, yes, the Pistons do get a second-round pick as well, but second-round picks are basically 90% misses most of the time. So it's a solid deal for the Nets. And to me, this is a deal that you make when you're getting ready to make a bigger deal. But Nick, you're the Nets guy. Your thoughts?
Yeah, they're the Detroit, and just to specify, they're getting a 2021 second-round pick via Toronto. So could be a decent pick, could be whatever. Like you said, second-round pick's not necessarily anything. And just touching on Musa, he was a first-round pick, a lot of offense to his game, a lot of possibility, popped off in the G League, had opportunities to play last year, was really bad. Like you mentioned in that highlight package, just doesn't really understand the NBA game, not really strong enough. has too much confidence, and defensively, he's really bad. Maybe the Pistons think after a couple years in the NBA, adding some more muscle, he could turn into a rotation piece, because there was some hype, and there is definitely some scoring prowess, but it's just like he hasn't put it together. And obviously, the Nets don't really care about second-round picks. They actually have a couple extra ones from trades they made in the past. Bruce Brown, like you said, though, Kory, Detroit Pistons fans, like talking to them this morning, they absolutely love Bruce Brown. He showed a lot of improvements for a second-round pick. He was probably one of like the most positive points for them last season. And as you mentioned, defensively, he's already a good player. Like, I remember watching him against Kyrie Irving, and he did a really good job against Kyrie. He's had some success. I remember seeing some stats about James Harden, how he D'd him up too. But the playmaking took a major jump last year. Like, he went from being a player that couldn't really handle the ball and make good decisions to being able to do that occasionally. Some of that was due to Detroit having so many injuries, but something that should benefit him down the line. And the catch and shoot numbers also went up. I want to say he shot 40% from the corners, which is always a positive sign when you're looking to be a role player in the team. And like you said, Kory, this could signal, hey, maybe there is a James Harden trade on the horizon, or even if you're just trading Spencer Dinwiddie, now you're adding another backup guard that can give you a little bit of playmaking. Absolutely love the move. Like, I think it's not a big move and no one's going to talk about it a ton, but like, working the edges of your roster when you want to be a championship team is so big, and turning Shana Musa into an actual rotation player that could play in the playoffs and essentially fills a need because the Nets desperately needed a guard defender. Bryce Brown fills that, and they got him for a freaking 2021 second-round pick. Shout out Sean Marks.
And don't forget, $400,000 in added cap space, which sounds like but it's a lot when you have superstars on the roster and you're trying to work in the margins.
When you're getting hit by the luxury tax multiplier, you're very happy when you can save $400,000, because that might turn into millions in terms of what your tax bill is going to be. I've heard a couple people mention maybe the Nets are trying to get under the tax, which is almost impossible for them. They'd have to do some crazy stuff, but that would open the full level, mid-level exception. But I don't think that's going to happen. Again, I think the Nets also sent money to Detroit in this trade. So whatever Detroit needs, maybe that's something they wanted. They're really hurting for money with COVID or whatnot. But overall, the least important trade of the day, but my favorite.
It was a good move. Like I said, these are the kind of moves that you see that can only lead to possibly a bigger trade. And like you said, maybe it isn't James Harden, maybe it's a Spencer Dinwiddie trade or some other trade in which the Nets can get rid of one of their guards and still feel comfortable with who the backup is. But either way, noon was when trades could start to happen, and we weren't disappointed for these first, 2.5 hours at least.
And I guess just quickly, Kory, while we're still here, any final thoughts on the James Harden stuff we've been hearing? We've talked about it a little bit last week. It's kind of picked up even more. It seems like Harden's trying to force his way to Brooklyn. There's not much clarification, though. We know Kevin Durant and Harden have talked about it. We're not sure in terms of the trade packages discussed between Houston and Brooklyn. We don't even know if they've had discussions. We know KD and James Harden have, and Harden has talked to Houston's front office. But what are your thoughts on that right now?
I mean, it's definitely the player empowerment movement. This is what this is what the league's been moving towards. James Harden does have 3 years left on his deal. So realistically, Houston has no real reason to deal James Harden unless he's going to become a toxic cancer.
Unless he pulls to Anthony Davis, I guess, really.
Right. So that's like the one benefit to the Rockets. But again, if your star player doesn't want to play, we also know that Harden, hasn't necessarily been, for a while was ghosting the front office, right? That one report was accurate. Yep. So I think there has to be some substance to it. It just depends if the Rockets think they can rebuild this relationship with James Harden, or if they should move on, and if this is the best package they can get for him. Because again, even though he wants to go to Brooklyn, if James Harden wants out, I wouldn't trade him to where he wants to go if I can get a better deal in place. Now, of course, you being a Nets fan, I know that you would say, "The fuck that, Kory. Let's go into the Nets."
Well, it just also gets to the point though where like if a player says that they're only going to play one place, it's hard not to trade them anywhere else, because now you're automatically like say Anthony Davis with the Lakers. Like the Lakers probably had the best package, but you could make an argument other teams were going to do it, but no one really wanted to trade for him because they knew that he wanted to go to LA. Obviously, Harden has an extra deal in his year, because in 2022-23 it is a player option, which he'd probably opt out and get a new contract. But still, having that extra year does give Houston a little bit more leverage, and that's what I think makes the trade more likely to happen at the deadline or next offseason. But still, like you said, Kory, player empowerment. it's a real possibility. I thought when we first heard it, I'm not going to lie, I was like, okay, this is a dream. Maybe it could happen, but it seems realistic. Like if you tell me that in 10 days we'll be talking and James Harden's going to be on the Brooklyn Nets, I wouldn't call you crazy. Like there's a chance it could happen. And again, we've talked about it. We don't think the Nets have the best package, but they can offer a pretty good package. And if Harden wants to go there, it's hurting their leverage to really trade him anywhere else.
Right. And again, the assets the Rockets would receive in such a deal with the Nets, you're still getting 2 young assets. You're still getting Spencer Dinwiddie, and all those guys are flippable again if you wanted to get rid of them in the future. So it still keeps flexibility if you're the Houston Rockets, who again are going through a major transition after firing their head coach, losing their GM, and Westbrook also is a name that likely will be on the move as well.
Yeah, I think Westbrook's trade package could determine a lot here. If they can't get anything for Westbrook and it's just like either future assets or just bad contracts, or Harden's like, yo, you expect me to do anything with this, I think it could kind of put more pressure. But it just seems like Harden is, if he's not done with the Rockets, he's at that point where like the next thing is going to make you want to be out. You know what I mean? When you have a job that you don't like and then like one more thing happens, you're like, okay, I'm sick of this shit. You guys aren't doing enough for me. I'm out of here. I'm going to go find a new job. And the one thing that does matter is like Kevin Durant and James Harden have a good relationship. So that's like something you have to put in there. And I know there's questions about the fit and all that, but you have that much talent, you try to make it work. And then obviously there's been some reports of Serge Ibaka signing too, get that OKC reunion in Brooklyn, but we'll save that for another day. Kory, any other thoughts before we get out of here?
Get the stars, worry about fit later.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel. And obviously we'll be dropping podcasts, videos all week. It's going to be a crazy 2 weeks, so get used to seeing our faces.
For sure. Peace out, knuckleheads.